There's new unrest in Inner Mongolia where protests are now breaking out over a recent CCP policy, and the regime has responded by sending the military in to allegedly quell the unrest. The floods in China also are still not showing signs of stopping as waves of floods continue to hit in the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. In response, CCP authorities have announced they will, quote, save Henan in the upper reaches and Jiangsu in the lower reaches. I'll go into what this actually means. Also, I'll be taking an in-depth look at Xi Jinping's plans to allegedly bring back the title of chairman, which was the same held by Mao Zedong, and that would give absolute authority within the Chinese Communist Party. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The former Khmer Rouge commander, Comrade Duch, who was Pol Pot's main executioner and security chief and who oversaw the murder of at least 14,000 Cambodians in the notorious S-21 Tuol Sleng prison, died today at 77 years old. Now, Duch, whose real name was Keqiang Guek Eve, was the first member of the Khmer Rouge leadership who faced trial in the communist regime's programs that killed at least 1.7 million people, about a third of the population, in the genocide known for its killing fields from 1975 to 1979. He was found guilty in a UN tribunal in 2010 for mass murder, torture, and crimes against humanity. As a bit of background on this, my father-in-law was a physician in Cambodia and escaped one of their death camps. He was actually famous for being one of the first individuals for coming out and exposing the genocide that took place in Cambodia. Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation did a video on his story. He's Dr. Nal And actually, one thing he told me personally, and that he said previously as well, and other people in Cambodia have said as well, is the Chinese Communist Party played a close role in Cambodia. You would often see at these different camps, these death camps in Cambodia, the Chinese military in their blue uniforms. They were unmistakable, and they were playing an advisory role for the Khmer Rouge in the genocide that took place. Now, meanwhile, there is new unrest in Inner Mongolia where protests are now breaking out over a recent Chinese policy, and where videos suggest the CCP is responding by sending in its military. This began when the CCP announced in late August it would require primary and secondary schools in Inner Mongolia's northern region to begin teaching in Mandarin, and would forbid as well teaching in the Mongolian language. Mongolians responded to this with mass protests, mainly students and their parents. Videos posted online on August 31st show military armored vehicles appearing on the streets in Inner Mongolia, which were believed to be sent by the CCP in response to the protests. Now, despite this, however, students and parents were continuing their protests. They're not letting up. According to Radio Free Asia, Chinese authorities have now instituted a curfew in the region's Lubei city. Eyewitnesses claim the city was on lockdown. No cars were allowed to enter or leave the city as well. Now, when it comes to Inner Mongolia, the Chinese Communist Party is launching a cultural genocide. Inner Mongolia is the part claimed by the CCP. There's also an independent part of Mongolia as well. When it comes to what's happening in Inner Mongolia right now, this ties to a broader picture of what's happening in China. The CCP is cracking down on religion, it is cracking down on different cultural groups that it is launching suppressive measures against. It fears unrest. And so when people are in these regions protesting against the CCP, when they speak out against its measures, and when they come out and stand up against its different policies, the CCP may respond with a pretty heavy hand. The CCP right now fears unrest. Why would it care about a bunch of students and their parents protesting a language program to the extent that it would possibly be sending in its military? This is a show of fear by the CCP. It's a show that the CCP is unsecure about its own hold in that region. Now, in addition to this, in addition to the CCP's lockdowns, its increased security presence in Inner Mongolia and in Xinjiang, where the Muslim Uyghurs are, the Chinese regime is also now turning its sights on Tibet. According to South China Morning Post, CCP leader Xi Jinping has given orders to increase border security in the region. This is in context of growing conflicts along the India border. Now, a report from CCP mouthpiece news outlet Xinhua suggested this move goes beyond disputes, however. Instead, it's calling for a new campaign to educate the public about fighting, quote, splitism, and to, quote, form an impregnable fortress of maintaining stability, and to strengthen the unity, it says, of ethnic groups in Tibet. Now, similar to what's happening in Inner Mongolia, The report is also calling for additional actions in the local schools. Only rather than a language program, she called for a more ideological education system to, quote, plant the seeds of loving China in the depths of the hearts of every youth. And when they say loving China, what they mean here is loving the CCP. The CCP tries to make its own identity synonymous with China. Now, she also called to create a, quote, new modern socialist Tibet. So what are we seeing here? This is again another sign that the CCP is fearing separatism. This is another sign that the CCP is afraid of something, because it's doing this in Inner Mongolia, it's doing this in Xinjiang, it's doing this in Tibet, it's doing this in Hong Kong. It is afraid of separatism. And in Tibet, they're even using the word, quote, splitism, to make it so that, again, they're framing this around the idea of these individuals trying to split away from the CCP. This is, again, a show of fear by the CCP, and again, hints at a larger campaign being launched right now by the CCP in relation to that fear. The CCP is also tightening its ideological control programs. It's doing these education programs in Tibet and in Inner Mongolia. Again, these are programs to educate the youth, to begin shifting the culture of these regions. And again, on this same note, in Hong Kong, authorities are starting a new campaign to mass test residents for the novel coronavirus, or the CCP virus. Already they've tested thousands of people at the more than 100 testing centers that the CCP has established in the city, and more than 500,000 people have allegedly so far signed up for these tests. Yet these swab test methods that it's using there have residents worried that the Chinese Communist Party is up to something more nefarious. They're worried the CCP is using these tests to collect DNA for biometric data, data the CCP can then use in its social monitoring and control systems. They're concerned, again, that as the CCP has begun a harsher takeover of Hong Kong, that the CCP is looking to bring Hong Kong fully under its different systems for social control. This is being interpreted in Hong Kong, again, why people are worried about it, in the context of the CCP's increased pushback to crack down on dissent. They're worried again of these protests in Hong Kong. They're worried that about a third of the population was supporting democracy protests there, at least just in terms of who was going out on the streets. The CCP is worried that those would spread to other parts of China. And so people in Hong Kong now are concerned of what this means for their future. They're concerned again that the CCP, in addition to implementing its laws in Hong Kong, is using its different systems as well for social controls, like the social credit system. The CCP has these big data monitoring systems, again like the social credit system, which gives each citizen a different ranking depending on their individuals they're in touch with, family members, their ideology, their beliefs, even their online spending. Every single action they make, everything they do, every person they affiliate with is tracked by the CCP, and they're given a citizen rating based on that. Your freedom in that society is based on your citizen rating. And so again, they're worried in Hong Kong, they're concerned about these new swab tests the CCP is doing, that the data collected from that could be used to feed into the system of the CCP. Meanwhile, the floods in China are still not showing signs of stopping. Over the past 3 months, heavy rains have continued in many parts of China, and floods in the Yangtze River and the Yellow River have been continuing wave after wave. In response, CCP authorities have announced they will, quote, save Henan in the upper reaches and Jiangsu in the lower reaches. Based on this policy, a massive amount of floodwaters were released from dams, which caused heavy flooding in Anhui. At one point, flood levels in Lujiang County, again in Anhui, reached 26 feet high. Days later, locals said that the flooding still remained at more than 6.5 feet. And as floodwaters are still not receding, residents are now lacking food and clothing. A Mr. Chen from Taichung Park in Lujiang County told NTD that on July 22nd, the local government dug a dike to release floodwaters, which then rushed into the surrounding villages. He again said the floods rose to 26 feet high, and now after more than 40 days, the waters have still not receded. Now when it comes to this, when the CCP has been talking about saving a region from floods, it often means diverting the floodwaters to another region. In the past, it has said it has sacrificed a region for the floods. And again, it has even praised individuals in those regions for sacrificing themselves on behalf of the party policy. When it comes to the way the CCP uses language, saving also means sacrificing. And again, this happened in Anhui province. And even despite these floods and amid the new campaign in China to reduce food waste, CCP leader Xi Jinping is also now calling to make water conservation a top priority. This is raising concerns again that in addition to food shortages, possible food shortages, China may also be facing water shortages. Now, Xi raised the topic on August 31st during a recent top-level Politburo meeting of the CCP. He is pushing for the conservation and use of water resources on the Yellow River. Taiwanese news reports pointed out that this followed an August 28th press conference of the State Council, which is technically the government of China, where Hong Yan-yun, the deputy director of the office leading group for poverty alleviation and development, said that the floods in China have affected more than 2 million people and said that 400,000 people are now having difficulty getting drinking water. Now again, throughout southern and central China, the Chinese Communist Party is facing these massive floods. You would expect that with these flood waters, that water shortages would not be an issue. But there have been reports in different parts of China of people getting sick from drinking their water. And the reason for this is the floods are causing pollution. And so their drinking water sources are becoming polluted. We covered some of these cases recently as well, where we talked about in one village, people were getting giardia. There were large outbreaks of it from, again, drinking the water that had been polluted by the floods. And so China as well, again, right now, in addition to the floods, in addition to food shortages, allegedly because they have this new food conservation program, they're now talking about water conservation. And it's very likely because their different sources of water have been polluted. And now for the broader stories for today. Now, several reports are noting a familiar pattern now taking place in the CCP that ties back to Mao Zedong and his path to achieving absolute power over the party. Xi Jinping, head of the Chinese Communist Party, may be looking to bring back something similar to the title of chairman that was established under Mao and that would signify a position of absolute power within the party. Now, some of you may remember that back in 2018, Xi removed the presidential terms, which was touted at the time as a move that would make him leader for life. It's actually not this simple, and I'll explain this in a bit. Now, how does Xi's purge relate to Mao's? Well, it might show a similar move by Xi when it came to the consequences, the outcome of Mao's purge. The purpose of the 1941 Yan'an rectification campaign was to help Mao reinforce his ideology within the party, his interpretation of communism or Maoism, to get rid of his political opponents, and to consolidate his position of power. Through this, Mao was officially given the title of party chairman, which had no term limit back in 1945. That historic purge was well designed and orchestrated under Mao Zedong, and it allowed him again to assume the highest position of power in the party. When Xi Jinping took office, the CCP restated its official viewpoint on the Yan'an rectification campaign. It declared at the time that the campaign realized the Chinese adaptation of Marxism, and it also showed the unification of Maoist ideology as the whole-of-party ideology. Also, it realized, it said, the unification of Mao's role as the top leader within the CCP and of his role in guiding the party's ideological line. And when it comes to trying to understand how Xi Jinping would think so highly of Mao's purge within the context of the CCP invoking the name of this purge, it's possible that Xi views it as a reference for himself when it comes to preparation to establish his own control over the party. And now again, as we mentioned, in 2018, Xi removed term limits. Why would any of this matter? Why would he need any of this? Now here's the background of this. Xi holds 3 different titles. He's the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, the Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and President of the CCP. These are 3 separate titles. So far, he's served 2 terms for each position. He is up for re-election within the party. Even despite his removal of presidential terms, again, he still risks losing his other 2 titles. And the issue with that is this. If Xi were to relinquish the other 2 titles and just keep the title of president, it would just be a symbolic move. He would just be a symbolic figure without any real power within the CCP. The real power comes from the other 2 positions. And so maintaining power for him means retaining both of those positions. Mao Zedong laid a clear model on how to accomplish this. Again, it worked for Mao, and Xi is now following that same model even in name. Now, Xi's second term as party general secretary and head of the military will end in late 2022, right around the scheduled time for the purge to complete. Again, this purge he's now working on. According to the Financial Times, Chinese political experts suspect that Xi will maintain a position of power beyond 2023. And again, one way for Xi to do this, to continue holding power without holding all of the positions within the CCP, would be to follow in Mao's footsteps of becoming the party chairman. And again, chairman would mean no term limits and absolute power over the Chinese Communist Party. Now, it's important to note this is analysis, and it's analysis being shown by other outlets as well. It's not absolute that Xi is going to take the title of chairman. This could also be a purge related to factional struggles in China. But again, given the context that in 2018 Xi did remove term limits, and given the context of other things he's been doing, which we'll get into in a bit, it does appear that this is a likely case. This is a possible case. This also takes place amid broader programs for the Chinese Communist Party to re-establish its dominance in China. The Chinese Communist Party is under attack from all directions, internationally, internally, and even within the CCP itself. It's taking many different moves, whether it's, say, these party purge, to bring the Communist Party itself into line, whether it comes to Xi Jinping going after political rivals, like with Li Keqiang, which we'll go into a bit more in a bit. When it comes to, for example, the CCP taking over Hong Kong and talking about taking Taiwan by force. This again ties into that. And also when it comes to its religious abuses and the reestablishment of party worship, which again we'll be explaining in this episode, so stick around. All of this suggests that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to reestablish itself, is trying to reestablish its dominance within China. And meanwhile, on that note, the top-level power struggle between Xi Jinping and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. Xi has again shown signs of usurping Li Keqiang's authority. We've mentioned some other cases on this previously. The most recent one, on August 24th, Xi Jinping chaired a symposium on economic and social work in the party headquarters in Beijing, which is Zhongnanhai. Chinese reports have noted that during this meeting, Xi brought together a group of 9 prominent economists to help create the CCP's 14th five-year plan starting next year and going through 2025. Within the context of CCP politics, this was a symbolic blow to Li Keqiang. Now let me explain. Normally, it would be the premier's job, Li Keqiang's job, to hold an economic-related symposium like this. Now, according to photos shown by the Xinhua news agency, one of the CCP's main state-run news outlets, Premier Li Keqiang was not even present at that event. Instead, the photos show Xi sitting in the middle of the picture. Next to him were Premier Han Zheng and propaganda czar Wang Huning. So where was Premier Li Keqiang during this time? According to Xinhua, again, one of the main Chinese state-run news outlets, on that same day, Li was attending the 3rd Lancong-Mekong Cooperation Leaders Meeting, which is a diplomatic event. In other words, he was at a meeting that wouldn't be considered crucial for the Chinese Communist Party, and especially not nearly comparable to formulating the country's next five-year plan. Things like this do not go unnoticed in Chinese politics. This sends a strong signal within their party. And this could point to one of two things, very likely. It could show that Li Keqiang is being sidelined, and that Xi will take up the job of guiding the economy going forward. It could also show that Li Keqiang did this himself, that he did this knowingly, and also maybe wants to be less involved, following additional incidents, again recently, that suggest he's been targeted by Xi. Maybe he feels pressured. So in this context, will there be major changes within the party charter? Will these, say, systems of leadership and authority be changed? Now, Xi has said on multiple occasions, including at this symposium, that China should fully tap the potential of its domestic market and rely on the concept of the, quote, domestic cycle. I'll be explaining this, of the Chinese economy. And he also talked about developing a new, quote, domestic cycle as the main body and domestic international double cycles, mutually promoting each other. I'll explain what this means. Now, the statement was first put forward by Xi Jinping during the 2 sessions in May this year. Basically, it points to a new model of self-sufficiency for China. And what could this pivot toward economic self-sufficiency mean? The emphasis, again from Xi, on domestic cycle reveals Xi's desire very likely to return to a planned economy and essentially maximize state control over the economy. Now, this could also signify a coming move to close off China from the rest of the world, something we've talked about on the show previously that's being discussed by high-level officials within the CCP. According to a report from BBC, some experts on China believe the emphasis on, quote, domestic cycle shows that Xi Jinping is, quote, preparing for a return to economic nationalism and economic isolation whose main market is domestic demand. Now, in a previous symposium held with dozens of entrepreneurs in late July, Xi Jinping said he hopes that entrepreneurs would combine the development of enterprises with the prosperity of the country, the prosperity of the nation, and the happiness of the people, and to also, quote, take the initiative to serve the country, share the worries for the country, and increase patriotism. In other words, again, he's suggesting that China needs a nationalistic economy. It does appear to be the case, with also internal circulation of cash. And the context of this is important. As the U.S.-China trade war continues to intensify, the Trump administration has hinted at a possible financial decoupling if China doesn't follow the rules on the trade deal. This could mostly lock the CCP out of the international market, out of global trade, since most international trade is done in U.S. dollars and cleared through the U.S. financial system. And this has been something the Chinese Communist Party officials have been talking about very heavily. If China was forced to financially decouple from the dollar, foreign companies that conduct business in China would take a huge blow, at least they say. There's been heavy discussion also within Chinese news outlets on this possibility. This might explain again why Xi Jinping is stressing the, quote, domestic cycle at this point, in combination with the CCP's creation of a new digital currency. And while Chinese leaders again appear to be trying to avoid getting kicked out of the global market, it does appear the CCP's top leaders are preparing for this, again with internal and isolated economic models. Now this could mean other things. The Chinese Communist Party needs internal circulation of cash for other reasons. Again, the Chinese Communist Party is facing pretty big economic blows, not just from the virus lockdowns, but also from the natural disasters happening in China. It is trying to rebuild its economy. It's trying to establish a middle class. For that, you need money to circulate internally within your own markets. You need people to buy houses. You need people to go out to eat at restaurants. You need people to buy Chinese products. You need the money to not be flowing into other countries. So the CCP is trying to restrict the outflow of cash. One of the big points with this new digital yuan, this new digital currency they have, is that they can manage that. They can restrict the money from flowing outside of China if they want to. The CCP can regulate external investment using that as well. And so again, this might mean one of two main things. It might mean on one side, what we talked about previously, top Chinese leaders within the CCP are talking about locking down the borders. They're talking about basically shutting things down, forgetting the outside world for the most part, and basically redoing the entire Cultural Revolution to reestablish the authority of the CCP. We see many different signs this may be taking place. At the same time, though, the Chinese Communist Party, on this note, has been talking about the need for internal circulation of cash in order for its economy to recover. So this may be related to that as well, or it might be a bit of both. Now, in addition to all of this, in addition to Xi showing signs of restoring the authority of a party chairman, in addition to the CCP's new push for an isolated economic model, the Chinese Communist Party is also reinvigorating the cult of personality and also the promotion of leader worship. Now, there have been several developments around this recently, but we'll start with the CCP's 70th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party on October 1st, 2019. In the lead up to the party holiday, Chinese state media reported that on the morning of September 30, CCP leader Xi Jinping and other party leaders entered the Chairman Mao Memorial Hall, where they bowed 3 times to the statue of Mao and paid homage to his remains. This drew plenty of discussion and analysis in China, and some outlets pointed to the similarities of this incident to one in December 2013, when Xi had only been in office for about a year. He similarly led his team into the Mao Memorial Hall to pay homage to Mao Zedong. And he also allegedly quoted former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping saying that the banner of Mao's thought cannot be thrown away, and that losing it would negate the, quote, glorious history of our party. But at the same time, Xi had said some criticisms of Mao, including stating that Mao took detours on the road to creating a socialist system, and also saying that Mao made some serious mistakes, including in the Cultural Revolution in the later years. Now, based on this, he had claimed previously that you can't worship Mao like a god, but it appears this is now changing under the CCP as Xi now worships Mao in temples. It appears this practice is now being promoted and even forced throughout China. Bitterwinter notes that while most temples and other places of worship were closed off during the recent virus lockdowns in China, the CCP's officials were even threatening to destroy temples if people worship at them. At the same time, it was allowing people to travel to temples to worship CCP's revolutionary leaders, including Mao Zedong and former Premier Zhou Enlai. This temple to Mao has allegedly seen a stream of CCP worshippers. The manager at the temple said they never received an order from the government to close and stated, quote, "Even government officials came to kowtow and worship amid the pandemic because the temple was not closed down." And similar scenes took place in other parts of China as well, where worship at most temples was forbidden and even tightly monitored, but where the worship of Mao Zedong, Mao's wife, and other CCP leaders was permitted. And the CCP has even been destroying traditional temples or forcefully converting them into temples for worshiping CCP leaders, including, for example, removing Buddha statues and putting up statues of Mao Zedong. Now, in a recent case in Shanxi, China, the Catholic news agency reports that CCP authorities ordered people who received government assistance to replace religious symbols in their own homes, including pictures of Jesus, with pictures of Mao Zedong or CCP leader Xi Jinping. If they refused to do this, they were told they would lose government assistance. A preacher told Bitterwinter, quote, "All impoverished households in the town were told to display Mao Zedong images. The government is trying to eliminate our belief and wants to become God instead of Jesus." Now, with that said, folks, again, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And also, if you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to Patreon in the description below. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. And also, if you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Now, with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.